I am only on the clock in one draft. I'm running out of drafts. We'll look at a few that have finished up. But the more important thing is we'll invite Shawn Siegele on. We'll do a Stealing Bananas Underdog draft. We're going to use the new Stealing Signals Underdog ranks. He has them uploaded. We are going to attack the best Ball Mania here in a little bit. This is Stealing Signals. Let's go. I guess I also have the Stealing Bananas background. That's what I should have done. Or maybe I'll switch it in a little bit when Shawn pops on. play the Stealing Bananas video. Tiger Upcut asks, is that a new intro? No, I mean, a while back I had to change the audio because I was getting a copyright claim even though I wasn't supposed to be. So just changed the music. But nope, that's the same one we've been using. Let's jump in to Underdog real quick. I want to spin the wheel off the top here. And then we'll welcome in Shawn in a little bit. He's going to be free in about 25 minutes or so. So we'll do some chatting, a little bit of Q&A. Love to chat with you guys. And then we're going to fire. We might multi-table. I don't know. We were talking about potentially trying to do multiple drafts at once. So it should be a lot of fun here at about 10:30 Pacific, 1:30 Eastern when Shawn shows up. Let's share the screen. I had my 100 drafts, right? And we're at the point now where I need to make another trip out of state if I can find the time. I mean, I'm wildly busy right now, but that's why it's good to have buddies to come on, help me do fast drafts. I'm on the clock in one. I have 4 upcoming. There's 3 here where I took my final pick and they haven't quite finished. The other 92 of the 100 that I've been working through are completed. We have 110 overall here. I'll be at 60 BBMs by the end of this. My next run is going to be almost all BBMs. I'm going to do, I think, at about 40 probably to get to 100, and I think I might finish at about 100 BBMs. We'll see, how that all transpires. By the way, if you're here, while you're here, like, subscribe, turn on notifications, comment, all that good stuff. I always keep forgetting to ask, but really trying to get the subscribers to the goal was 3,000 by week 1. We're at 1.65. We are moving in that direction. It is certainly possible. I'd at least like to get to 2,000. That's like the main goal. 3,000 is like the stretch goal. We'll put it that way. A difficult, I had to move my camera down for the Yahoo pod yesterday. Not a perfect, pace right now. We'll see if we can start getting that closer. I'm also, not going to be able to do maybe as many streams in August as I'm hoping for with all the other stuff going on with redraft, with the ship chasing live drafts. We have one tonight. Come check that out. Yeah, Mackins makes a great point here. The pick clock on slow drafts will start dropping quickly. Definitely going to be aware of that. What's up, Absolute Sauce, and the rest of you GMs? To all of you for thanks for hanging out. Yeah, I'm hoping to get into these slows, the next batch, a pretty good sized batch very soon, because if I wait much longer than this, I'm definitely going to hit those slow, those pick clock reductions that can be kind of a headache. And I can't do 100 more because of that, and because I'm juggling all the redraft stuff and all the content. And so I'm probably going to be in like the 50 draft range, 40 to 50, and the majority of them will be BBMs to get me to at least 100 BBMs. Is sort of the way that I think this will finish up. I'll probably do at least one or a couple of the higher stakes stuff as well to get a few of those in here in August. Yeah, I'm already over 100 in the season long, or in the main seasonal stuff here. That's what I was clicking on. 35 eliminators, had 24 for the Superflex, 9 marathons. It's going to be 10 marathons. It's going to be 5 sprints. Those are finishing up. I'm at about 200 total drafts. I'll probably finish at about 250. We'll have to expand more next year as as things develop. I gotta get used to these slow draft plans. I gotta figure out. I gotta schedule my vacations so that I want to start layering them where I would have loved to have been able to make a trip in the last few days so that I had some starting while these ones were all finishing. Because like right now, it's been a few days now where I wake up and I look and I'm not even necessarily on the clock in anything, or I'm on the clock in one or something like that. Let's jump into the one where I am on the clock. It is an eliminator. I'm in the 17th round. Already have 3 QBs. Wound up with a lot of QB capital here. It looks like Stroud, Stafford, and Geno. But again, with the eliminator, you get multiple stacks, and it helps you, I think, through the weeks build out that weekly upside, as we've talked through with the eliminator. You don't want to just shoot floor. You want to shoot for spike weeks every week, basically, to make sure that you have stuff to cover you when you have down weeks and you have some of the issues where you maybe have an injury and you get a weak score at RB2 or a weak score at tight end or what have you. So I took Stroud relatively early behind ADP here on a team that had Nico. And then I take Stafford a little ahead of ADP later, but he has the early week 6 bye, which I like in the eliminator. Eliminator is obviously close, so I guess we don't have to go into too much strategy, but this is a team that had Cup. And then I still take Geno after ADP to get that third stacked QB on a team where I had taken both Charbonnet and I assume JSN. Yes, I had JSN. I also have Keenan Allen on this team. So if this team does make the eliminator final, I have a really nice Seattle stack with a Chicago bringback. I don't know that I have bringbacks on the Houston and Rams stuff. And I'm less worried about bringbacks in the eliminator. I'm more worried about the directional correlation of team-based bets. It's just so hard to get your team all the way to the final. I just want my team to be able to hit each week in a major way. So this team has Stroud, Stafford, and Geno, Chase Brown, Zach Charbonnet, Rico Dowdle, Bucky Irving, Audric Estime. It has Chase, Nico Collins, Cooper Kupp, Keenan Allen, JSN, and Cortland Sutton. Sutton, not a player I take a ton of, but I only got 5 really strong receivers and really want receiver depth in this format. So Sutton was a nice 6th option. McBride and Njoku, so really strong tight ends. I did this in a lot of these eliminators. I want to be able to add tight end points in a way that a lot of the teams in my pods, I think, won't always have tight end points, and that can hurt your weekly floor. I want to really ensure that I'm building some tight end points into these builds. Again, the eliminator has filled as far as I last saw. And so, this will just be food for thought and how we see it all play out. I'm bummed that when you go to my completed drafts, I only got 35 eliminators in. I tried to each trip I made when the eliminator was open, I made the eliminator a focal point of my entries. I did like a lot of slow puppies on this last one. I did about 30. I did about 30 BBMs and I did about 30 eliminators. And then I did, just a few marathons and sprints, but really focused on that eliminator as much as I could to try to get as many entries. It's one of these things with the slow drafts, man. The contest can just fill. I only wind up with 35. I guess I'm going to wind up with 36, 37, 38. 2 of these that are full down here, but it's not done. Must be eliminators. I think I'm going to wind up with 40 eliminators is what it is. But still, I love the format. It's my favorite. We've done a lot of talking about it. I think you guys, that's not a surprise. The reality of the eliminator, what I've talked to a bunch, is a bunch of your teams are going to be dead by like week 5 when the buys actually hit, right? Like 2/3 of the field is done by that point. So there's this strong probability that if I only have 40 builds that, as much as I've written about and talked about the eliminator, that none of my teams are actually going to get very far. That's why you want to, it's a format especially with a $10 entry point. I would have just loved to max. I would have loved to have all of those teams done, but it's just not something that was plausible given my situation. But I will be excited to see how they play out. I mean, at least I got 40 and I feel good about them. Anyway, this team here is a build that I do really, really like. I got the like a pretty strong 3 quarterback build. It's going to give me, I think, a really nice quarterback scoring floor each week between Stroud, Stafford, and Geno, who's one of my favorite late round QBs as things are crystallizing for me. A really nice 2 tight end build with McBride and Njoku, and so you get this element of really, really supportive points at the onesies every week. And then it's a very true 0 RB build where I get I think a lot of firepower at receiver in those first 6 picks. Chase, Nico Collins, Cooper Kupp, Keenan Allen is my first 4 guys. I mean, come on. Obviously, health with Kupp and Keenan is a little concerning, but if those guys can stay healthy, JSN, Cortland Sutton, round that out. JSN's a guy that I really like to be a breakout. And then it's a 0 RB build where, Chase Brown, Zach Charbonnet, Rico Dowdle, Bucky Irving, Audric Estime. It's not super great, but if this is my weak point and I'm strong at the onesies and at receiver, I feel good about my weekly floor, which is what you're looking at. And then I see ways where this could get pretty meaningful, right? Like Dowdle should be able to support with some volume. And then Irving and Estime, especially, and Chase Brown, if things develop for him, Zach Charbonnet, there's a lot of cases for some standalone value with contingent upside in this 0 RB build. But certainly what I need to address is RB in this build. It's round 17, 3, 5, 6, 2. I also need to get a 7th receiver, but I don't think that's as pressing necessarily. Although the top 2 guys in the queue are 2 that I really would love to hit both. Jalen Tolbert's a guy I've been taking a lot more of in these very late rounds as he's getting that camp buzz. And when we talked about Dallas, when we spun the wheel and got Dallas weeks ago, I talked about how the setup is massive for their secondary receivers. It feels a lot like the Rams last year, where there's one real stud and then not a lot of target earning upside behind that. When I did the projection pod with Leone, I will cop to being sold a little bit on Jake Ferguson, or at least on there being some upside and more meat on that bone, where he's going into year 3. And I'm always talking about tight ends are a little bit slower to develop. So it's at least plausible that he could be a guy who takes another step forward this year and looks better and looks more justifiable at his price. I've talked about how he's been a pretty much a routes-based play, especially last year, and that I didn't think there was a ton of ceiling there. But the opportunity is in front of him. I get it. My issue with his price remains that is the ceiling conversation. I don't think he can't be a small win. I think he can hit his near his price. My projections on him put him kind of close to his price. The issue is when there's this many really strong tight end profiles, the 7 elite tight ends that I'm really in on. You see me draft them on almost every build. I have Trey McBride on this one. And then there are additional upside. I think Everett Ingram's upside and David Njoku's upside is probably a lot stronger than Jake Ferguson's. And then Brock Bowers is just such a dynamo. It's like, how is Ferguson in that mix? But there's probably some upside there that I'm not fully accounting for. And so I'm trying to, consider those scenarios for him as well. But if that doesn't hit for Ferguson, there's just so much available opportunity. Brandon Cooks really saw the peripherals fall off last year. The targets per out run fall off. Jalen Tolbert's the guy that's been making a bunch of buzz. Dak is talking about him as a guy that they spent a lot of time together this offseason, and he really likes. He wasn't that great of a prospect, and he basically has done nothing through 2 years. I'm not all in on Tolbert. But as far as a 17th or an 18th round guy, we're starting to get this buzz that he's going to run a lot of routes in a high volume pass first offense. And while I hate to say it, if something does happen to CeeDee Lamb, I do think that really hurts the whole offense. And that would be the big point. The Dallas could be pretty fragile. But they're a team that's been top 10 in play volume for 8 years in a row. And Mike McCarthy, even when he had Kellen Moore, and then last year without Kellen Moore, has been very pass heavy. This is a team that's good. And then you look at the running backs. This team is going to throw. Even if Lamb goes down, they're going to let Dak be a big part of why they win or lose. And so you start to get to this question of, if Lamb were to go down, is there just so much pass volume that a guy like a Jalen Tolbert can't help but at least have some production? Again, for a 17th or 18th round receiver, you're talking about a lot of routes. You're talking about a very favorable situation and even some contingent upside that he's not going to be a star. He's not going to be Puka Nacua from the 17th or 18th round. But in an eliminator build, the type of floor he can provide is really nice. The other guy I threw in the queue for audio listeners is Kendre Miller, who I would also like to add to the 0 RB build. He falls too far these days. He's now in the 17th round here. I tweeted the other day, he's just routinely in the 17th round because he had an injury early in camp, and his coach had this one quote that you can't make the team from the training room. There's multiple ways to interpret that. I want to be a little bit defensive of Kendre Miller at this point because his ADP's fallen into the 190s, and people are like, he's going to get cut is the way that they're treating him, or is just like completely not going to be a part of anything. And the other way that I would interpret it, or the favorable, there's an obvious way to interpret it negatively, and that's the most likely one. If we want to at least give ourselves a 10% out that there was some favorable way to interpret those comments, it's, to me, like part of the case was that this team, this whole offseason, by not adding running backs, was telling you that they had some plans for Kendre Miller, who's a guy that they took in day 2 last year, was a 21-year-old rookie, was hurt a lot last year, and is going into his age 22 season. Both Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams have vanishing peripherals. They're not the same players they used to be, especially, I mean, Williams especially, but I was going to say especially Kamara, because that's the guy that you would really be worried about in Kendre Miller's upside case. He's the guy that's going to play the most. There's a lot of concern with Kamara's profile. Talked about it on a recent Stealing Bananas, I believe. But Kendre Miller is this guy, this young player that you would expect to be able to step in and have some potential. That was the case. That's why I took so much of him. And the favorable way, such that you could possibly look at a comment about, cutting a young player favorably, is that this idea that the Saints not adding a running back all offseason meant they were counting on him, is that, Dennis Allen was expressing some frustration that they were counting on this guy. In some ways, I'm like, man, like he got pretty aggressive with that comment because they have been expecting Kendre Miller to be a big part of their offense this year. Anyway, it could be bad for Miller. He could get cut. There could be a lot of issues. When I was talking about that with Sean and mentioned the cut thing, Sean threw out this idea that, he could land with the Cowboys. He's a TCU guy out of Texas. Yep, that's just, fan fiction at this point, that Kendre Miller might wind up the lead running back for the Cowboys. I joked about that in my tweet. But it is at least plausible that a cut could put him in a different situation that's more favorable. I don't know what the deal is with Kendre Miller. People are, using this phrase in my mentions multiple times, that he has a 10-cent head. I mean, maybe. I don't really understand the whole situation. It sounds like behind the scenes there's been some problems with all that, not taking care of his body, etc. But if he's able to get healthy and start to do some things right, like I still think that the opportunity is there, right? I still think the guys ahead of him aren't great necessarily, etc. So I'm comfortable starting to take him in the 17th and the 18th, especially if you guys have not been taking a lot of him. I would say get in at this price, because if he just gets healthy and plays a little in the preseason, the wins are going to change on him. Again, I in my tweet, I mentioned, is there any player in these rounds that has a better setup? And a lot of people just started mentioning all the contingent upside cases, but they were all based on an injury. My point is that Kamara and Jamal Williams, as far as the top 2 backs that he's supposedly behind as a number 3, might just prove in the first 6 or 8 weeks to not be good enough anymore. And, Kamara wants a change in different Kamara wants a change in his contract and some different stuff. Anyway, a little more into Kendre Miller than I think the market is at this price. I did stop taking him as he was falling in the rounds 15 and 16 range. I was seeing him in 170, 180 when his ADP used to be at 150. But we're at a point where his ADP is now at 190, and he still falls behind that. Right now at a 190 ADP, he's the top guy in the applet here. So, I mean, he would be a nice add to this build. The problem is, I think I want Tolbert for the build more, as much as I said all that stuff. I have Rico Dowdle in the build already. It's a little bit of a directional bet with Dallas. And I do... I don't know. I'm going to pivot back off of that again. I'm going to take Miller. I've been saying that I like the running backs in 18 more, but then that seems to be flip-flopping every day. I haven't liked them as much in the last couple days, and there's some wide receivers I'm getting back into, like a Greg Dortch and Andre Yosevash. And there's a lot of guys that I started scrolling down the receiver list, and I was like, I don't think I have to have Tolbert. I also saw that Keenan Allen here has a week 7 bye. So that played into why I went the direction I did. I'm all caught up. That simple. Sean's going to be joining us in just a minute. Let's go to the wheel real quick and talk about whatever team this lands on. Look at that. We get the Kansas City Chiefs on the day that Sean's coming on. For those that don't know, Sean's a big Chiefs fan. Grew up in the area. We gotta remember some guys first. Immediately I thought of Dwayne Bowe. You obviously have to talk about Priest Holmes. You got to talk about Larry Johnson, but I think it was Derek Blaylock who had a 4-touchdown game alongside Priest Holmes. The Dolphins running backs did this last year. Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane both had 4 TD games in the same game. But yeah, right here against Atlanta in 2024, Derek Blaylock and Priest Holmes both score 4 touchdowns in the same game. All 8 of them are rush TDs. Look at those 2 stat lines in the same game. And Blaylock, for his career, more or less, that was it. I mean, that was the pinnacle. He had 10 total TDs in his entire career, or 10 rushing TDs. He had a couple receiving as well. But 4 of his 10 rushing TDs for his career came in that one game. That's a fun, remember some guy. Yeah, Priest Holmes into Larry Johnson was an insane run. Charkandrick West, that gives us a Spencer Ware and all those names. There's a few more running backs from that era. Oh, God, yeah, Jamal Charles. Again, we have Sean coming on. Chiefs greats, Joe Montana and Marcus Allen. Love that. Dwayne Bowe. Jamal Charles should always be the first name. That is a great one. Sammy Parker. We got Tony Gonzalez. Yeah, Sammy Parker, Eddie Kennison, some of those wide receivers. What was it? They had a Derek Alexander wide receiver back in the day. Tony Gonzalez was the leader. Here's Alexander. You got to go back to, I guess, 2000. Derek Alexander, Gonzalez, Kennison. They had Chris Chambers for a year. Derek Bowe. We had Macklin for a brief stretch. Obviously, Kelsey and Hill in these stretches. But the running backs, man, Holmes, Johnson, Charles, what an insane run of running backs. These Dick Vermeil offenses with the toss plays were so incredible. Charkandrick West, Spencer Ware. Yeah, Kareem Hunt is also in here. Damian Williams. There's a fun one. And then Darrell Williams. 2 different Williams here. You guys got Niall Davis in here. Sammy Parker. Christian Okoye. He's a fun one from Tecmo Super Bowl. The Nigerian Nightmare, as Alex P. Keaton mentions. Niall Davis. There was a playoff game where Jamal Charles got a concussion right away, and Davis had a really good game. It was a shootout with the Colts, I want to say. Here it is. 7 catches and a receiving TD, 18 carries and a rushing TD. They lost to Andrew Luck's Colts 45-44. And Jamal Charles got a concussion right away in this game. It was such a bummer. But Alex Smith had a great game, 378 and 4 touchdowns. This is one of the all-time great playoff games. Andrew Luck just outdueled him, even though he had thrown 3 picks. T.Y. Hilton, 13 catches, 2 touchdowns in this game. Dwayne Bowe, 8 catches, 150 yards and a TD. Hilton, 224 yards. Wow. Donnie Avery with a 79-yard TD in that game. The Chiefs have a lot of fun past players. Sky Moore, Darwin Thompson. There are so many remember some guys in this team. I was scrolling back up to the top a little bit. So as far as this year, I mean, I think the biggest thing, man, it would take a while to talk through all of the Kansas City stuff. But the biggest thing for me is the wide receivers last year were really bad. And if you look at the snap shares and the way that things progressed, like let's go to MVS. Let's go to his game log 2023. And just to the snap shares out here to the right, he's playing high snap shares. He's still in the 60s. He's still in the 50s. He finally scales down to like the 30s. Then they got him back up late. He plays quite a bit throughout the year and just really doesn't see any volume. 42 targets all year. Sky Moore started out with a ton of snaps and really scaled down. Let's go game logs 2023. More so even than MVS, where he was in the 60s and 50s, but then really started to fall off and didn't play in some of these games late, but had some games where he was just 25% snaps. Didn't play in the postseason. I can't remember if he was hurt or if they were just making him a healthy scratch at a certain point after they reacquired Mecole Hardman, and they had numbers at receiver, so he may have been a healthy scratch late. But that part of it where they were going with MVS and Sky, they always do rotational stuff, so you're not going to see big snap rates for any receiver. But the fact that they were going with those guys impacted Rashee Rice. Really, I just got to go to this sheet. I don't know if I've ever showed you guys this sheet, but this is the in-season sort of stealing signals sheet. My buddy Sam Hoppin helps me with this. Don't have data for 17 and 18 here, but this is snap percentage. If I just go to wide receiver and zoom in a little bit here, you can see how, in the early games, Marquez Valdes-Scantling is higher. He's fading. Sky Moore is higher. He's fading. Rashee Rice is low. Even though he was really producing, he starts to get into the 60s outside the bye. But really, it's week 14 where he finally gets to an 85% snap share and beyond. We see that for 4 regular season games down the stretch and then also 4 playoff games. And in that 8-game sample, he paced for like 114 catches, I think it was. If I go to my recently published offseason stealing signals, I know I have some data on that. Not that his pace is that important, but yeah, in those 8 games from when he got finally to a full snap share through the playoffs, 149 target pace, 113 catches, 1,300 yards. That's the kind of production from week 14 through the playoffs in those 8 games that he was on. That more or less is on par with what Jamar Chase did last year, what Keenan Allen did last year, what Michael Pittman, what Devontae Adams did last year. Now, this is a team that the main point was they had no wide receivers. This year's team, they go out and they address, and I think really importantly, address the vertical element. They get Hollywood Brown. Oh, I went to a different tab. I love to do this. They go out and get Hollywood Brown in free agency. They trade up in the first round to draft Xavier Worthy. That's 2 guys that should be able to attack vertically more. Rashee Rice is more of an underneath option. The low ADOT, right? The really strong yards per out run as a rookie, even for a low ADOT. He's a guy that added a ton. This yards per target at this ADOT is incredibly strong. Good targets per route run. A 2.39 yards per route run at a low ADOT is really, really impressive. And the way that I've looked at that favorably for him whenever he's in, because we are going to have some issues with a suspension, is that he could actually add some more work potentially in the deeper intermediate range, et cetera. There's also some issues with how behind he could be in a new offense, whether, Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy are those dudes. I mean, Xavier is a guy who earned volume at different depths in different roles throughout college. These targets per out run 3 years in a row are incredible. The ADOT was really high. Then it comes down. He starts doing a lot more around the line of scrimmage his final year. The weighted targets, really, really strong his first 2 years. Not quite as strong his third season when Adonai Mitchell was there. And yet there's still plenty of raw volume. The real issue here is the yards per target wasn't as elite as it could have been for a guy with his speed and all of that. But that's it's the after the target efficiency. There's been a lot of concern about Quinn Ewers. It was particularly bad, especially relative to ADOT this season, where he had a really high ADOT and a tiny yards per target. No downfield production whatsoever, despite a guy with a 17.6 ADOT. Now you pair him with Patrick Mahomes. If the issue is opportunity, is efficiency, not his ability to earn targets or his ability to get open, you pair him with Patrick Mahomes. That's a really, really exciting thing. I'm very bullish on Xavier Worthy. And particularly if the Rashee Rice suspension opens up early playing time, people are pretty confident that because of Sky Moore, because of Rashee Rice, and how slow those guys are brought along, that Worthy is going to be brought along slowly. But this element of the verticality that they need to attack defenses has me believing that, and then also the fact that they traded up in the first round to get Worthy. He's not a second-round pick like a lot of those other guys. There's certainly a case to be made that Worthy will be more impactful earlier than, and if he is, he's an absolute smash. So overall, a lot of what I've written about the KC receivers we've talked about. This is a team that's number one in pass rate over expected 5 straight years. You have the efficiency in addition to the pass volume. No other team is going to be even, close to that. That's one of the big things I emphasize in my offseason Stealing Signals write-up that I, just went into is it is going to be close to that in terms of a baseline. They're going to be able to get to the Chiefs, but the thing that I've been trying to emphasize this offseason is when we look at the Chiefs passing game, they are a unique high floor for receiving fantasy value. It's not just the pass rate that we know is going to be very high. It's also the efficiency that we know is going to be very high, because that's what Patrick Mahomes is and has been. Even when he's had bad receivers, he's been able to elevate the efficiency of, like when Rashee Rice was ready to produce at a lower ADOT, he's a 2.4 yards per out run rookie, which is just a phenomenal thing. I argued early in the offseason before the suspension risk that at the 2-3 turn where he was going in the spring, he was a massive value, and he should be at the 1-2 turn with Puka Nacua, basically. You still get a huge value on that, and we don't even know about a suspension yet. I'm assuming there will be one, but if it's only a couple games, Rashee Rice is a huge hit, but so is Xavier Worthy. And I don't take as much Hollywood Brown, but I also see a lot of scenarios where Hollywood Brown is a pretty big hit. Travis Kelce has priced way down and I think is also a viable target at tight end. But a big part of this is we know that Andy Reid talked about sort of limiting Travis Kelce's routes to a certain degree last year intentionally, and that we are expecting that going forward. I expect that if he picks up any kind of minor injury that he might have to sit some time out. And so there's, this element of if we're down on Kelce, then there's a lot of opportunity here. I don't think the collective wide receiver prices are anywhere near where they should be. There's a lot of meat on that bone for Kansas City. The running back situation, we haven't talked a ton about, but Isaiah Pacheco is a guy who's rising. People are really in on it. It looks like he's going to have 3-down work. I am concerned about the overall ceiling, especially with the total pass rate. When you go through the projection element, when you look at his game logs, there's not a lot of 20 touch games. There's a lot of 15 touch games. When he hits on some receiving stuff, he'll get to 18, 20, 22 sometimes. But often it's, even for a guy who plays a ton, it's not as massive of a workload as I think people assume. There's obviously going to be an efficiency element with defenses having to focus on Patrick Mahomes. There's obviously, which opens up running lanes. There's obviously going to be an element where he can score a lot of points. And with Jerick McKinnon on the offense, or expected to not, sign late or anything, there's a lot of hope that, for Pacheco drafters, that he'll be playing more in the passing game and has the potential to have a career high in receiving. And I think all of that does set up really favorably for him, but he's still a really tough click in terms of what you actually get from a ceiling perspective. I think of him as sort of a small miss, small hit type. Although I don't know that he's actually a small miss type, right? But I don't know that. I do think the expected volume is probably going to be there. It's just that, no running back's really small miss. All running backs have some big miss potential. And if that all doesn't materialize, there's some concern there. So we are, I'm making Shawn wait right now so I could get through the KC stuff, but let's bring Shawn on. I gotta change the brand, Shawn. I gotta go to the Stealing Bananas.
Oh, there we go.
How are you doing?
Good. I was just sitting back enjoying some praise of the Kansas City Chiefs. Ben, I had a tough decision in round 5 of the Apex Experts League because Xavier Worthy and JSN were both there, and I did select Worthy. And after listening to you praise him, just feel better about it, more comfortable about it. I mean, I've obviously been in, but I love when other people are in.
Yeah, you have been driving that bus definitely heavily on him all the way through. I mean, he was a great prospect before the landing spot, before the Chiefs training up to get him, and even before the combine run, right? And the fact that he ran the 4.21 or whatever it was, 4.19, whatever, the fastest time in combine history. I think a lot of people think he's going to have to be slow coming along, but he's actually earned a ton of volume at the college level in a way that speaks to a potential to be a lot more ready for the NFL game than I think people expect, and then has that rare trait, that speed element that the Chiefs, I mean, we saw Patrick Mahomes, shrink last year. The Chiefs need to get that back. So anyway,
have they not been posting videos of Xavier Worthy running 30 yards behind the defense?
I think it's like they're trying to make that point. Like it seems to happen every single practice.
Like, that's not the real defense. Right. But we do appreciate that you're doing some promotion for your guys. It's you go and you search Xavier Worthy, you see all kinds of crazy stuff, including concern that he's not going to be able to handle press. And then all the Chiefs fan sites are out there with these competing articles where they show Worthy getting knocked to the ground and just being done. And then they'll show a video of Tyreek Hill getting knocked to the ground and held down for the whole snap. And they're like, that dude probably is no good. So,
you know who I didn't talk about when I was going through the whole Chiefs thing? I like to do this, spin the wheel thing and break down whatever offense. I didn't talk about Deneric Prince. I haven't chatted with you about him at least for a couple of weeks, and I think briefly prior. Are you hearing any? I mean, I don't think I talked to you since the CEH PTSD stuff has come out, and it seemed I cooled on Prince a little bit. I do want to mention that because I was telling people who watched these streams that I was really into Prince for a bit there. I thought his price would rise because it seemed like he would maybe take the number 2 job, but some people have pointed out that he was getting first team reps at this time last year as well. And then other people, a lot of reporting came out about CEH maybe being held back a little because of some of the off the field stuff, some of the PTSD stuff, which is, very scary. He, went through some stuff in college. Have you been hearing anything about that, or where do you stand on Prince right now?
I think he's still a good play at the end of drafts. I mean, the main thing just coming out that you alluded to is that the Chiefs appear to be really solidifying behind Pacheco as a guy who's going to do everything. And I mean, that's both good and bad. It's certainly great for fantasy managers who already have him to have not only the rushing part of your offense, but also the running back receiving part really coalesce around a player who is not an NFL level starter, I think is disappointing. And yet it does give you a little bit of a window into what's going on in the rest of that depth chart. Now, one of the things that was frustrating this offseason was the decision to go back with CEH as opposed to adding someone like a J.K. Dobbins. And certainly now that he appears to be in the mix with the Chargers, you wonder if they regret that decision. At the same time, I mean, Dobbins' contract with the Chargers is basically one where, I mean, they didn't think he was going to be able to do anything either. It's still really hard to make sense of what LA is doing with their backfield. Yeah. There are just enough much more talented football players going in the range that Pacheco is going in that I find it difficult to make that play. But the combination of the likely EP, the expected points, how that rushing and receiving workload manifests, and then the defenses they face, right? Where you're talking about the lightest of light boxes and the yards before contact that have really, in this case, not much to do with the running back, but simply how defenses are defending them. He's got such an easy path to the kind of high floor outcome
Right.
that probably doesn't hurt you if you execute the rest of your draft. The question still is, does it help you within the context of 2024 ADP and 2024 overall tactics?
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect way of putting it. The big question is not whether he can actually be like worth his pick. It's the opportunity cost that you didn't use that pick on, this year's whoever superstar player from that range. And, so often it's a question of him or an elite tight end. In some of these home leagues, though, he's going in like the third round. You're talking about him or, I don't know, like a Cooper Kupp. Well, if Cooper Kupp hits the ceiling outcome that has been discussed, obviously, where he gets back to being the focal point of the Rams passing game, I mean, it could be a lot like he's older now, but it could be a lot like the Cooper Kupp round 4 price we got in 2021. And that's a great example of the type of player that you miss out on when you're like, well, I'll take this small win because it looks like a small win. And Pacheco does look like a player that is going to have production and not have a lot of threat to his touches, as you're talking about. He's a really tricky one for me. I don't want to tell people to not draft him at all. And especially in best ball, I think, you can do some Pacheco builds, but it's just what are you missing from your build? You're missing the wide receiver depth early, or you're missing an elite tight end, or even the potential for an elite QB, which I don't think either of us is really in on. But I would almost rather, if I'm not going to do my typical, wide receiver depth and tight end, I maybe want to build a Josh Allen team than a Pacheco team. But it's that type of a question. It's a luxury pick, it feels like, because I don't think he's going to be so dominant that you're like, I had to have Isaiah Pacheco. Yeah.
Well, underdog, he's going right after Tank Dell, Zay Flowers, and Sam Laporta. So in many drafts, you don't have access to those guys who seem like a very clear tier breakup. The next receivers after him are Amari Cooper and George Pickens. You and I discussed them a little bit on the ranking show. And if you passed on those guys for Pacheco, we'd probably be like, yeah, that's fine. There are some players later in round 4, including a running back who doesn't have quite as good a context, but has a similar sort of EP projection, if not a better EP projection, is much more talented. So then the question is, do you want a bad running game with a great player, or do you want the Chiefs offense? However you want to define that. There's still a question about how much actual running value they will create, especially if their receivers are more exciting, because they would prefer to throw to him if those guys are wide open, right?
That's
how
right.
Do you balance that?
People have knocked Mahomes talking about how much he throws in the short area near the goal line. And that's like, led to some of his high TD totals, but like that is very important here as well. Like Isaiah Pacheco doesn't get the types of goal line carries that other running backs might get. They'll do jet motion tip passes and swing passes and underneath shovels to Travis Kelce and all sorts of creative pass options around the goal line. If those receivers are really good, they're going to use Xavier Worthy's speed around, the goal line, the way that they've used Mecole Hardman and Kadarius Toney and those guys in the past. So it's a really, really interesting conversation. We could talk about this all day, Sean, but you are here to do a draft. You talked about our ranking shows this week on Stealing Bananas. We are going to do another a fun draft here where you have uploaded my underdog rankings. So you're going to be looking at a set of rankings that doesn't necessarily coincide with the rankings that you typically use. They'll be similar, but sometimes you'll probably be like, where's that guy that I think should be here? We'll get some feedback from you on these rankings in real time as we draft this team together. But yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. I do want to play the Stealing Bananas intro real quick. So we'll do that as you jump into the draft. Or I guess I should say the Stealing Bananas intro, such as it exists on the Stealing Signals YouTube channel, the other version of the intro. We got Shawn Siegele here. We are in the draft, waiting on a few more. Is this a BBM, Sean?
If I've clicked the correct button.
All right. So anybody watching that wants to jump in, draft against us, we're waiting on a couple more.
Ben,
But yeah, you got the rankings uploaded. I'm excited to hear your take on where they're wrong as we work through this draft.
well, the first area they appear to be wrong is that somewhere in the last couple of days you moved our guy down.
Oh, you're talking about Garrett Wilson. So on Underdog, I've tethered to ADP more with these rankings. So I'm very comfortable taking Garrett Wilson quite a bit higher. The redraft rankings over at the Stealing Signals newsletter at bengresh.substack.com are a lot more bullish on Garrett Wilson. We'll just say that. I've had to defend that take. But in the Underdog streets, I'm trying to stay a little bit more tethered to ADP because of the elements of, we're drafting a portfolio and all of those things. Want people to get a little bit of balance and still get exposure to some of these other guys.
Then we have the 110, which I don't want you to get too excited, but that is in the range.
That is more or less the ADP, the expectation. And then if he goes, you're just miserable because, well, I guess 110 is better than 111 right now, because at 111, you have to make the Puka Nacua decision. And I think probably a lot of people are still pulling the trigger on him there, but it's a challenging one with him suffering an August injury that sounds like it's not going to be long-term, but you also don't love a guy who's hurt in August already going into the season. I've moved him down a little bit on the rankings. What would you do with him if you were, forced to make that decision? Are you moving him behind like a Drake London or a Jahmyr Gibbs?
I will be. I just think you have to take those guys, especially when you put that in the context of how dominant Cooper Kupp has supposedly been at camp. I mean, there were whispers that he should be the guy going first anyway. And now you add a lack of clarity here that is unsettling, especially when you're talking about the very top and you have some other choices. I think you have to go with the players who, are not going to blow you up right away. I mean, you think right back to last season where Cooper Kupp was going early for a long time, and it eventually just became clear that that was going to be a ruinous first-round pick.
That's right. And we made that adjustment eventually. He went a little bit later, but yeah, those early injuries do tend to linger into the season. There's data, there's good research on it that those can be impactful well into the season. Nacua missing a lot of practice time, not having all of his, reps and all of his, his muscles and everything else on where it needs to be, the conditioning where it needs to be. You can maybe lead to some other, compensatory injuries, straining something else, etc. So there's a lot of risk that can come from missing all that time. The guy at 109, it looks like, timed out and took AJ Brown. So we do get our guy. We get to start this draft with Garrett Wilson. As I mentioned, I'm a lot higher on him on the redraft ranks. The redraft ranks are more what I believe is the correct way to rank the players than these Underdog ranks. You can always check those out at bengresh.substack.com. Shawn, you over at Rotoviz wrote a piece about this year's superstar wide receiver. I won't say exactly who it was, but it might be somebody that we've referenced. But
Ben, did you realize that in terms of adjusted yards per attempt, the other people who played with Zach Wilson posted worse numbers in both 2022 and 2023? We are back. Before we get into that, you have Drake London as the top guy here. He does have the same buy as Garrett Wilson. Nico Collins, Chris Olave, some other interesting plays at the top. Other than in London, the next ADP guy is Deebo Samuel. Those are probably our four choices.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be comfortable with Deebo if you wanted to go there. I need to slide him up if the Ayuk trade does happen. And I didn't know his ADP had already risen so much to 16. I did actually move him up, but in my document, I'm new at the Underdog rankings. In my document, it has ADP, but I mean, obviously, this is a it's a Google sheet. You can turn it into a CSV. And I'm going to go make a change right now. I mean, this is what we're going to do live on the show is make changes to my rankings. In that document, Debo's ADP is 19. You just showed me that it's 16. I had moved him up, but kept him just behind Olave. Seeing that there is this this bump to where he's all the way up to 16, I want to be in on Debo, essentially stay up above ADP in any format. I already wanted to be in on him when Ayuk was expected to be there. It seems like, the other thing about the Ayuk thing is even if a trade doesn't happen, it's very similar to all the things we were just talking about. Everything I just said about Puka Nacua not getting the practice time and potentially not being when he was Ayuk a little bit in the doghouse a couple of years ago, Debo was an absolute smash that season. Last year, Ayuk was incredible. I think people are just assuming who continue to take Ayuk reasonably high are just assuming that even if he doesn't get traded, that he's going to step back in and have the same season he had last year. There was already major issues with Brandon Ayuk's profile in terms of not having necessarily enough volume and really needing the efficiency to be elite for him to, to justify the second round price tag that he was getting. I've been arguing for most of the offseason that he was rich there. And now you're looking at a situation where he's going to miss basically all of August, or he's going to be learning. He's either going to be learning a new playbook, or he's going to, at best, sit out all of August and then show up for San Fran week 1. But I don't know how you expect him to be a 3+ yards per out run guy if he just shows up week 1 and hasn't practiced all August. Again, we have a little bit of a history with him in the years where the offseason didn't go as well. This time last year, all the reports were Brandon Ayuk is as locked in as we've ever seen him. Deebo Samuel had that famous quote, "You can't guard him in a phone booth." Everyone was talking about how Brandon Ayuk was going to go on and have an elite season because he had an incredible offseason and he showed the drumbeat was very loud. This year, Brandon Ayuk's not practicing. And I don't think people are accounting for that enough. In terms of when he does play in 2024, I think he's going to be influenced by the fact that he didn't practice all offseason. He didn't probably, he wasn't probably as prepared as he could have been in all of those elements.
Now, you have the situation with Jamar Chase where he and Burrow have said one practice and he will be ready to go. Do you have concerns about any of the rest of these situations with the star receivers where everyone wants to be paid now, including multiple years ahead of when their contract runs out, which you can both understand, but at a certain point makes it difficult for the team. There are some very enthusiastically priced receivers who are not practicing.
Yeah, it's a good point. Because, I'm applying this to Ayuk, but why would I not apply it to CeeDee Lamb or some of these other guys, right, that are not practicing right now? I do think Lamb and Chase, for better or worse, are a little bit of a different equation in that their offenses don't have the other options, basically. Like, I don't think Ayuk's going to have as bad of a year as the year he was in the doghouse if he stays with San Fran. But I also think San Fran won't need to push him week 1, right? They'll make more of the offense go through Deebo and Kittle and those guys early in the year. And then Ayuk sort of has to earn his role in the offense again in some respects. It's a different situation in some of the other offenses. Kyron goes off there, Sean. The ADP pick looks like it is Diggs. The rank pick by quite a bit is Diggs. Do you have a case for anyone else?
No, I don't. I was going to make the case for Kyron. Both of our receivers whom we've selected so far have the Rams in their playoff schedule. Kyron Williams is wildly undervalued, but he did go one pick ahead of us.
And I do have him one slot behind Diggs overall, ahead of Kyron's ADP also. He was the ADP value there. A few more receivers go at the turn. Tank Dell, Zay Flowers, T. Higgins would be the rankings pick. We've taken 3 receivers. We could go like Laporta here. It correlates with Deebo. What do you like here?
Yeah, I think that Laporta getting that San Francisco-Detroit connection going probably makes the most sense. You and I have talked a lot about the fact that Laporta probably shouldn't be here at this price. And then I'm assuming that basically the reason he wasn't the top guy on your board there is that, you have T. Higgins 10 spots ahead ADP.
Right. Very excited about T. Higgins. The camp reports there, you mentioned Chase isn't practicing, but what we're getting from Higgins is what we got from Ayuk last summer, right? Like everyone is talking about how he's had the best camp he's ever had. This is the year where it all comes together for T. Higgins. Shawn, we've talked about it this offseason that he's the same exact case as he was last year when he was going in the late second, but people just, and wide receivers are more expensive now, but people just don't want to make that bet again. He had an injury plagued year last year, but so his numbers dipped a little, but you have to adjust, I think, for him playing injured, which was very clear. And he also made a lot of very clear, T. Higgins-y plays where it's not like the skill set wasn't there anymore. He made some fantastic plays. I
believe he had the worst drop percentage in the NFL. Sorry, I thought you were going to go the other direction with T. Higgins-y plays where the ball, there's no one around him. The pass is right on his chest, and he doesn't catch it. Both of those things are true. You get the highlights. We got some bad drops.
We got some bad drops too. A lot of that stuff feels like it sort of needs to go back positively. The more the camp hype is there, the more I think T. Higgins is mispriced. The other reason I would say that I had him ahead of Laporta is I have Laporta, Kelsey, and McBride back to back to back. I do think they're all in a really tight tier. And so, yeah, you can take Laporta there, certainly, but I don't think you have to push him up because I just want to take Trey McBride, right? So it's a little bit of a question, but getting McBride was off the board there at 401. And Kelsey was off the board in the middle of the third. We get Laporta as a tight end 3 in this draft at 403 in a situation where he correlates with Debo, and he's the clear ADP value relative to the Higgins thing. And we started with 3 straight receivers. So, I mean, those are all very obvious contextual spots to go away from, the specific ranks. I don't think I'm going to go rush to adjust it. I don't hate that I had Higgins above Laporta. Laporta was obviously one of the top 2 options there, and I have him ranked slightly ahead of his ADP. So it's, it's still very logical to take him there in the context of this build. This team is really fun to start, Shawn. We have Garrett Wilson, Debo Samuel, Stephon Diggs, and Sam Laporta.
And Higgins makes it all the way to the 411. There will be some opportunity to take him at some different spots as you move through these drafts. Ben, you had just been talking about the Chiefs before I jumped on. Hollywood Brown goes at 507. Dalton Kincaid, we're rolling back toward our pick. We'll get you back over here to see your ranks. Kyle Pitts, Chris Godwin, Xavier Worthy.
Yeah, we already got Laporta. I mean, I'd be open to Pitts, but I think if anything, we would probably want to consider him in the 6th and pushing him around. Do you like Worthy here over Godwin? I'd be fine with either.
Yeah, let's go with Worthy. You made the case on him. I do think he's going to get those manufactured touches. He's basically like a version of McCole Hardman who isn't awful, but he's going to be able to catch that underneath pass and then take it the distance in a way that, and I'm not sure if I said that right, but the intermediate pass. And that is something they've really been lacking. There have been a handful of teams who were looking to create that dynamic with their offense this offseason, the ability to get the ball to their players at that level and have run after the catch ability. The Chiefs are able to execute it.
So we're back up. Pitts didn't go at the turn, Shawn. Neither did Godwin. I mean, both those guys are options. I'm okay with a number of different paths here. Don't be holding to my rank here. What do you like?
Yeah, I think that, Deontay Johnson is pretty interesting.
Grab him. Or Pitts. Either, yeah. Whatever you want to do.
So I failed on the Deontay Johnson part there. I do love Kyle Pitts. Ben, we talked a lot about him in the rankings shows. And getting the 2 tight ends here, I think when we have the 4 wide receivers, I don't know that we had the pressure to really need to go after Deontay Johnson. He's somebody that we both really like. Chris Godwin is saying that he is finally back multiple years after the injury that has taken him that long to rebuild and feel like himself. Is that one of the reasons that you have him here several spots ahead of ADP, or are there some other structural or contextual reasons for your ranking.
Was he several spots ahead? I thought he was like close to ADP.
ADP is currently 61. You have a 57. Obviously, that's kind of splitting hairs there.
Yeah. So definitely ahead though. Yeah, not really intentionally trying to have him ahead as much as so the ADP 61, when I made the sheet, it was 59.5. So I was a little bit closer even still when I made it. As much as, not wanting to be out on him, I haven't taken a lot of him. I take a ton of Deontay Johnson. It's absolutely no issue for me to be taking Deontay ahead of him. And I'm actually going to move him behind Xavier Worthy and Deontay right now as we talk, because that's how I actually drafted. And it's what I wanted to do as we were sitting there. I would have preferred to go Xavier and preferred to go Deontay. I do like Godwin. Like, I don't want to be completely out on him. I like him with the reports that he's moving back to the slot, and that is, going to be helpful for him. At the same time, the more buzz that Jalen McMillan gets, the more I think you have to be concerned about both Godwin and Evans at their prices, and that things aren't going to look exactly like they have in the past. So yeah, I don't think you like have to, and especially if Godwin's price is sliding a little, as you said, I don't think you have to get him, in that spot. I might even move him down a little further here, Sean. Kind of messing with the ranks now. The guy that was way ahead of ADP there was Pitts. And I don't know if I love how that manifested where I have him ranked and how far it made it seem like we absolutely had to take Pitts, how far ahead of ADP he was. At the same time, all they really did was move him up to where he was slightly behind Andrews and Kincaid, because I do think if you're in the early fifth and Andrews and Kincaid go at the 4-5 turn, I'm willing to pull the trigger on Pitts at that point. Pitts typically always goes the 5-6 turn. You're not going to get him to fall all the way late into the 6th. And I think there's a case that like you're actually getting like a unique combo while Pitts belongs there. I think he's right with Andrews and Kincaid. So part of the reason I put him there is like, I don't mind if people take him at 502 once Andrews and Kincaid are gone. Now in my actual rankings, I have Pitts ahead of Andrews, but in this with a little bit of tether to ADP, I don't think you want to go that high with it. But if you get Pitts onto like a CeeDee Lamb team, that's actually going to be a somewhat unique combination with something I was thinking about with why I put him there. And I do think, tight end's a unique position. I do think Pitts belongs up there. So that's part of why I had him way ahead of ADP. We're back up here, Sean. Your guy, Jordan Addison, is at the top of the ranks here. We can maybe push him around the turn as well. Is there something
So
clean?
ADP would not put us on anybody interesting.
So let's take Addison.
Let's do it.
We need to get a wide receiver 5. I do think he still makes sense here at 82. It's a little ahead of his ADP. We do think a suspension will come, but he's a guy that offers real wide receiver upside in a range where that no longer really exists. Brian Thomas was gone. Curtis Samuel was gone. DeAndre Hopkins went one pick after Addison. We know he's got an injury. I've slid him in the ranks a little bit. So now at 87, as we come around, you're probably really liking Brock Bowers. The top two guys in my ranks are both tight ends. Ingram's the big slider. It's kind of a bummer that we did go Pitts over Deontay with Ingram sliding all the way this far. Either him or Bowers, I think, would be a fun pick at this turn. But we have two tight ends already. Pretty clear.
Yeah, that's the reason that I was moving on to Deontay there. And apologies to you and everybody watching to have bungled that. I do want to mention something on Pitts here in a second. The question for us as we make this selection, I think, is Jonathan Brooks versus Jaylen Warren. Warren is the ADP value. He might be a better pick on a team that is pretty heavily zero RB.
Let's take that. I got to move Brooks down just a touch after our conversation this week, Sean, in our rankings discussion. His ADP a little bit lower, as you noted as well. I think I'll move him down behind Warren and Mostert. I think as we were sitting there, I would have liked both of those guys in that build more. Warren and Mostert, that is. But still going to leave Brooks in a range where you could definitely take him. But he's a really unique piece, obviously. We talked a little about the potential for some back-weighted production with him. What were your thoughts on Pitts?
Well, I mean, you sold me completely on him again the other day when we were doing the ranking show. He is somebody who is going at 512. Laporta is going at 311. Again, these are not huge ADP values, but you get a little more than 2 picks worth on both of those tight ends. So to get Pitts at 63 when his ADP is 60. I really like the way that part has played out. I think we have so much firepower now at the tight end position. It potentially saves us a roster spot as we go through. Certainly having Addison, even though he was a couple picks ahead of ADP, and there's even a slight chance that he dodges the suspension this season, in which case, I mean, he's going to probably play 3 rounds, right? So the current construction of this group with the 5 early receivers getting 2 tight ends we absolutely love and at a value, and then be able to come back and get Jaylen Warren, who, if someone really blows up in that Pittsburgh offense, it would seem to be him. I love the way this draft has started.
Yeah, it looks fantastic right now. Can you scroll down a little bit on the draft board?
Yeah, get us in the right spot here.
We'll slide down a bit. Evan Ingram, I talked about how he had been sliding a little bit, falls all the way to 94 in this room, which, I mean, he's a guy that's been tough to get because there hasn't been enough of a gap between him and those elite tight ends. But Kittle went 64. Ingram was the next tight end off the board at 94. Or no, excuse me. Ferguson went 90 in between there. But between Kittle at 64 and even Ferguson at 90, there was this really big gap between the elite tight ends and the others. It created some nice value with Ingram at 94, Bowers at 95, and Njoku goes at 98. Some of those people in the early draft slots got a little bit of a gift there, I would say, in this particular room. As we're working back, Sean, we have our 5 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, and then Warren to start the running back build. My quarterbacks are not always, really perfectly priced. I kind of threw them all in tiers, and so you can see that as we're starting to move forward with this group of quarterbacks, that they're kind of all tiered up. It's fascinating how much Zach Moss and Chase Brown's ADPs have converged in the last few days as well. I've kept Moss in a range where he looks like the pick right now, but I'm not necessarily. I prefer Chase Brown straight up. So,
let's do that.
Let's him or Javonte, whichever you feel. But yeah, Brown's going now quite a bit ahead of Javonte. That has moved quite a bit since I last dug into ADP. What I'm learning as we're doing these live is I need to get the new ADPs into my document and go through again and try to keep these ranks tethered to ADP as they are shifting. I initially released these on Sunday, the 4th. We're recording on the 8th. It's been 4 days, and that has made quite a bit of difference in some cases. We're back up. We took Chase Brown there. Is there...
So I put us over to the ADP ranks here so you could see kind of where we were on Brown versus Javonte on the last pick and likelihood to get back to us. Zach Moss does go in the interim. The highest guy you have here is Javonte. I think that's probably your choice, unless you're wanting to grab Brock Purdy.
I mean, I think Javante's fine. Yeah, Purdy was the one I was considering, but we're more or less out of time. I was gonna ask you your thought if you think we need to get the QB pick in there. I mean, so my rank does have Purdy, and ADP has him in this range. And we have Samuel and we have Laporta coming back. My rank actually has Purdy behind Caleb Williams and Trevor Lawrence, who I tend to like more. I don't necessarily love Purdy there. He is the stack element, but what other stacks are we going to be able to build here is sort of the big question. We maybe should have gone Purdy there. Yeah, with Casey and Houston already gone, I don't love doing Minnesota. We're kind of looking at Rodgers and Cousins and Goff. I guess, yeah, we have Goff, Rodgers, Cousins, all his options. It's not as dire as it seems, but
so the Amon-Ra drafter has Joe Burrow, and that is probably the one that you have to look at as the biggest threat. That's also the pick that is more or less right ahead of us and about where the ADP is on him. I try and get Purdy and Goff to fall a little bit. This is probably not exactly the right draft to have pushed that, given where we are with some of the other players that we have. Having said that, Ben, after working on that Garrett Wilson piece, I'm mildly more enthusiastic about Rodgers. I think when you consider where he is priced and what the thesis has to be for Garrett Wilson to do what we think he's going to do, I don't think you want to shy away from taking him in this particular team.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When I take him, I definitely want him to be tethered to Garrett Wilson because I think, I have a few where it's like Rodgers, where I've taken some Mike Williams, whose price to me, Sean, has just gotten absurd. It's way, way down there. He was activated off PUP yesterday. I think people think I kept hearing the Michael Gallup stuff, and people really don't understand that Michael Gallup was bad for a year and a half before he tore his ACL, basically. Like his really good year was multiple years prior to his injury. And people are like, he never got back to what he was. It's like, well, I don't know if you understand what he was. But Mike Williams, if you go look at his profile, has actually been a really consistently strong player. I'm not saying he's definitely going to get all the way back to what he was, but it's not the same conversation. And the post ACL thing is always, relative to how good the player is. I think he's a really interesting fit with Rodgers. That said, for real NFL terms, that he's an interesting fit with Rodgers. But that said, I do think the Rodgers profile, in some cases, I like the players paired with their QB when it's like the number 2 receiver. We talked about this with like Higgins and Burrow before, where it's like if Higgins goes off, Burrow's going to have a great year. I think the Rodgers upside case is more tied to Garrett Wilson, is what I'm trying to say. Garrett Wilson has to be CeeDee Lamb, and then Aaron Rodgers will have a strong season. We are almost back on the clock. Caleb Williams comes all the way back. We don't have him stacked. You have him at the top of the queue. He's my top QB by rank by a lot. We both think he's going to run a little bit more than is being advertised. Do you have an issue with taking him unstacked?
No, I love him here.
Okay, let's just take him. A lot of people will turn their nose up at that, I believe, but from a value perspective at pick 130, there's a lot there. We can still stack with our other QBs. Did Rodgers go? Or does he go a lot later?
No, he goes later. He's not somebody that's keeping an eye on. Cousins was one I thought we could push all the way around to 154 because the Drake London drafter is not a good fit for QB. But in fact, he goes at 133 right there. This probably puts us back on a running back unless, let me make sure. Your ranks here. Charbonnet would be the guy. You see anything else you like instead?
No. I could do Lloyd. I know you really like Lloyd, but Charbonnet does fit with Caleb, which I think you're looking at when you threw him in, right? When you took Caleb, right?
Yeah, and he's going to be the nice ADP pick right there. I've mentioned, I think before, that Jake Bose has put out some research for us suggesting that ADP values on QBs don't make as much difference, but Caleb Williams at that price, then I'm willing to take the players unstacked if it makes sense with other things. There are certainly paths where he would be the guy. I love having a team like this where we have Williams, we're loaded overall, and it would be nice probably to get Aaron Rodgers now. But yeah, this is looking good. The other thing you can do, which is one of the reasons why you could take these 2 early tight ends, you maybe have limited your flexibility a little bit, but there are some tight ends that fit with some of the other things that we're looking at too.
Take a Cole Kmet as a tight end 3, you're saying, even though we have the 2 elite tight ends? Don't think most would do that, but it could be a somewhat interesting build. Couple questions, Sean, in the chat that are kind of interesting. Benjamin May asks, how high are we moving up Pearsall if that trade happens? Rusty Shackford asks, does Kittle jump ahead of Pitts if when Ayuk is traded? I think those are both really interesting questions. I would say on Kittle that I'm not moving him that high. I've heard people talk about him as tight end 1 at that point. Like everyone's going to have a different response. I think if you're moving him really, really aggressively, then you just had him mispriced before, right? Like it's not that crazy to see contingent upside in these types of scenarios that like Brandon Ayuk's out of the offense. He's that big of an upside case for you. Then you probably should have had him higher ranked prior, in my opinion. Yeah, I would still have him a little bit. I'd basically have him right in, like I mentioned earlier, having Pitts right behind Andrews. I would have Kittle maybe right behind there. The Pearsall question is a little trickier for me, where there's a lot of Juwan Jennings buzz still happening. Pearsall wasn't necessarily a perfect prospect. There are some scouts and some people that really liked him and then say he would be a really good fit. I don't know that he's the answer for the Ayuk work, right? And so, like, particularly the vertical element, Pearsall has been more of a yak guy. He's more like, I think, for people that have talked about it in terms of usage, more like a Debo sort of handcuff, if you will. I'm not, like, I've struggled to move Pearsall up a ton, Sean. We're about to pick here. And I think his price is going to definitely come up, and there's uncertainty, and you want to be in on rookies with uncertainty, and he's a first-round pick, and this is an amazing offense, and I get all that. But also the concentrated element of the offense is key. Juwan Jennings only had 19 catches last year, even as Deebo Samuel missed a couple of games. Brandon Ayuk missed a game, and their number 3 receiver didn't even finish the year with 20 catches. That's while playing big snaps in a couple of those games. One of the games Deebo missed, he played 85% of the snaps and didn't catch a pass. The other one, he got like 12 targets. So, I mean, I think there's some potential for Pearsall, but there's also potential that essentially the offense consolidates on CMC and Deebo and Kittle. Sean, we are back up. Rodgers made it back around. You've starred Wandale here. So it looks like Liget has really fallen. I have him far too high. He's fallen behind and gotten banged up in camp. But yeah, I like the Wandale Robinson pick or the Rodgers pick. What do you think?
I think that Rodgers will make it through to us, but I don't see someone that we need to have. The other question then is, would you want to do something to go to three QBs, given that we have some week 15, week 16 Rams pieces? Stafford does go in the interim, so we don't need to worry about that. I was going to ask you if you had any running backs from that previous group who would be picks that would push you off of Rodgers. All of those guys more or less go. We're looking at Wandale, Ray Davis, Bucky Irving probably here.
Yeah, and Bucky should be ahead of those guys. I'm not really sure why he's not. It must be an ADP thing where their ADP is actually converged. But I could also go Wandale. I'm very comfortable with Wandale here. Okay, we're gonna go Bucky. Yeah, I was just sort of commenting on my own ranks as we're kind of doing this in real time. Yeah, so the ADP I have in my sheet has Kamani Vidal at 159, Davis at 165, and Bucky at 172. So I have Bucky behind those two to try to be respectful of ADP. That has changed significantly. The ADP that we were just looking at has Bucky basically on par with them, which means I need to move Bucky up. Sean, he's my highest drafted player. I was looking at my exposures recently, I think on the last stream, and I have like 37% of him. So I'm not trying to take Bucky on every single team. At the same time, it still doesn't make a lot of sense where he goes. I'm glad to see that the price has finally is finally reflecting.
Because you want to be able to put that big chunk of picks at a really good price and say, look what I did with closing line value.
Right. Yeah. I'm going to put that on Twitter and be like, I'm so smart. Exactly. No, I mean, the thing is, I've been saying the whole time, I don't understand. And some of the other prices have gone up, but not Bucky's. And so I've continued to say, I don't understand. I don't think he can close at 180 ADP. This is crazy. And we're now at a position where at least I don't feel like I have to take him every draft, Sean. Like it's kind of crazy when he's available in the 16th, 17th round every time. The problem for me is I'm just finishing up these slow drafts that have been going for months. I have not drafted any new drafts a lot in the last week or so, and there's a lot of stuff moving. And so I am outdated on ADP. That's a big lesson that I'm learning here as we are testing these underdog ranks. I think they've otherwise held up strong, except for in the cases where I tried to tether to ADP and then ADP moved in a direction where now, like I was behind ADP on Liget and he has fallen a ton. And so now I'm I just moved him down. I moved Zach Moss down in real time. I'm updating my ranks as we go here, Sean, and I see all these guys that are at the top of our queue that I still don't want to draft, even though they're at these lower prices than where I had them.
Well, the situation with Xavier there is tough because they continue to kind of discuss him in project types of terms at the same time that Mingo has supposedly had a fantastic camp. I think that you can look at those two pieces of information and probably come to the conclusion that you want to draft Deontay Johnson, that these other players within the group are probably still more or less untouchable.
What were your thoughts? Because I didn't give you a chance to comment on the Kittle and Pearsall fallout for a hypothetical Ayuk trade. I haven't really given myself a chance to think through all of that, but I kind of gave my thoughts. What are you thinking on that?
Kittle was extremely undervalued. And so if this moves him to a more accurate price, in some ways, that's going to be disappointing because we have all of our big drafts coming up. I was really looking forward to getting him at prices that frankly just didn't make any sense. I mean, Kittle is, I don't think anybody's going to bat an eye if you say Kittle's the best tight end in football, and then you have that offense that is going to be hyper efficient. All you have to do is fall into a handful more targets. Certainly you would expect to have the big plays. I don't know. I mean, you kind of hope that Ayuk just stays and doesn't do as much, and then you can get the previous thesis on George Kittle.
That's right. Sean, we're almost back up. Oh, yeah. I was going to mention that Wan'Dale Robinson had stuck around, almost made it all the way back to us. He did go the one pick before. As soon as I thought about saying it, he went off the board. I have Ray Davis at the top of the ADP list here. At the rank list, his ADP has slid a little bit as well. Another one where I don't think we have to go that direction. If there's another option you want to go with, I like that. Yeah, so you've moved Jalen McMillan to the top of the queue. I'm very much in on that. He is a riser that I still have him ranked ahead of ADP, even as he continues to slide a little or to rise a little bit. So we take McMillan there as our wide receiver. What's our build now? We have the 5 running backs. He was only our wide receiver 6. Right. So important to get a receiver there. We are at a 2-5-6-2. We lost a little bit in receiver depth when we took the 2 tight ends. And so that's, just one of those elements. I'd be very open to either of those Denver picks. Did you have an option a little bit lower that you like?
Well, because we did pretty heavy zero RB, I think we could take a Kendre here. You and I have talked about how, once he gets back on the field, he gets very interesting. Again, we could take Estime.
Let's go Kendre. That's fine. Okay. Yeah, no, I made that case before you hopped on. I just took him in my one slow draft where I was on the clock to open the show. He was available in the 17th round. I tweeted about it yesterday as well, that I'm just like, we're too far. Like, he's available in the 17th round of a bunch of these. We just took him in the 16th. The early 16th, and it looks like a reach by ADP at that point. He was the second to top player in my rankings, or at least at running back behind Estime. But a big part of that is I've advocated for Kendre a lot, and his ADP has slid, and so I'm not trying to leave him in a range where he's going to get drafted everywhere. But made the case at the top of the show, Sean, that the situation hasn't really changed in terms of if he can get on the field and get the coach's favor back, he's still behind 2 aging running backs whose peripherals have cratered, and you're still thinking that throughout the season there's this very real possibility that Miller could be the lead back for the Saints.
And I mean, depending on how you look at this, I got a little static for passing along I don't know if it was a false report, but just kind of combining enthusiasm for Bucky Irving with very glowing camp reports and suggesting that he could be in the mix to win that starting job. Along those lines of something that's almost certainly not true but interesting is a report or supposition out of Cleveland that they could add Alvin Kamara to kind of give themselves a window for Nick Chubb to get completely healthy. I only bring that up because I don't think that's going to happen to again emphasize the fact that now that Kendre Miller is free, I do think you have to start adding him again.
I had not heard that report that Alvin Kamara is going to land in Cleveland. So there you go. The guy that was really mad,
position, what have you?
Yeah, you made a comment on our last live stream that as you alluded to, that Bucky Irving could take some of the lead role, and there was somebody in the chat that was pretty mad about it. He messaged me multiple times after that. He sent me a tweet a few days later and was like, "Can you please tell Shawn that report doesn't exist?" And I think he went and read every Tampa Bay, and I was like, I took it from you as just sort of excitement that like that could happen, not that was a report that was out there. But
but in terms of a committee, when you read what they're saying, I mean, Ben, I think it's going to be a committee. So I'm just going to double down on the incorrect report. Then we're heading toward our pick here in round 17. This is either 2 more receivers or a receiver and just randomly throwing a Bo Nix, a Derek Carr, a JJ McCarthy, a Sam Darnold onto the end of the team.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in on that. It's interesting to look at my receiver ranks and be like, who are the receivers I would actually want right now? But yeah, here in the 17th, is there? We definitely don't have to take Corley, but we have Rodgers. I'm way behind, meant to be behind ADP on Corley, but McCaffrey makes a lot of sense too.
So let's go with McCaffrey here. He is
correlated with Pitts.
Off of Pitts. Walker goes with Stephon Diggs, and obviously Corley goes with our quarterback. I'd been thinking of Hyatt and Daniel Jones together, but Daniel Jones has been gone for a while.
Yeah, there were some picks here that caught me by surprise a little too. The other round 18 receiver that the other late player, I guess it was around 17, that I was comparing with Kendre Miller in my draft a minute ago in the slow was Jalen Tolbert. He went really high. He's a receiver that I don't know where you're at on him, Shawn, but I'm trying to get a little bit of him. I would have thought that he maybe would make it to the 17-18 turn. I think I saw him go a while ago. It's different in the fast draft streets. It's fun to get into these different lobbies. Slow drafters and fast drafters. Well, the big lesson I'm learning here is there's different types of people there. It's probably fun to do both if you are trying to get a mix of builds and those types of things.
The other play that we didn't discuss, but would have been a lot of fun, I was moving him up quite a bit in my rankings while I was listening to you discuss the Chiefs, was a Justin Fields, who he was still there at our Kendre Miller pick. I think in retrospect, I would have liked to have gone that direction. So Corley does go at the turn. This seems like Devontae Walker. Do you have concerns that he's going to get boxed out? Do you prefer Hyatt?
No, let's take Walker because he does correlate, as you mentioned, with Diggs. I think we do need another receiver here because we kind of didn't crush the receiver depth earlier, so we get 3 late. You can see how that kind of fills out the build. It puts a little pressure on Caleb and Rodgers at QB as a 2 QB build, but the 2 tight end build is fine. And so we wind up with a 2-6-8-2, right? Like sort of the standard 2-6-8-2.
Exactly. And I think with this team, we were strong enough with the 5 running backs, even though the first back was Warren, that we could have gone Justin Fields there. Also, because we have the 4 receivers really early and then Addison. I mean, Addison is a little bit the wild card, where if you get the 5 receivers of that caliber early, you're probably good. But the problem with him is if you get a 3-game suspension, then that, a little bit of a fly in the ointment there, allowing us to, I think, more readily justify the 8 receivers. We've got some workout on the site suggesting that, especially when you invest early, the 8 receivers is probably too many. I think with the way this draft developed, it's exactly right for what we're looking at here. We need Kelly Williams to score a lot of points. We drafted him without his teammates. Now we do have that set against opponents really nicely in a way that I think, again, makes it a dynamic move. in isolation. But Ben, I mean, the overall theory of this team works extremely well. One of the things that is kind of interesting is just how much you want to break the value of your team in order to get some structural elements. I like the fact that the overall look of the team, the types of players that we want to have, didn't get compromised by trying to force things for some very minimal week 17 benefit. And we want to get there. And I think if we do, this team would be uniquely positioned to do some things with certain game types on that final weekend.
Yeah, this is a fun build. The Caleb price was so nice. I mean, certainly would like to have him stacked up and would like to have all the stuff correlated as well as you can. But to your point, like you're just trying to make good picks as well. And I think that doesn't get discussed enough. And you were alluding to that as well. So let's review the whole team, if you don't mind scrolling up, particularly for the audio listeners. We got the Garrett Wilson, Deebo Samuel, Stephon Diggs start. Took Sam Laporta, Xavier Worthy, Kyle Pitts, and Jordan Addison before getting to running back or quarterback. In the middle rounds, we got Jaylen Warren, Chase Brown, and Javonte Williams to start building out the running back room. And then Caleb Williams, Zach Charbonnet, Aaron Rodgers, Bucky Irving. So that whole block was no wide receivers or tight ends, right? And then Jalen McMillan, Kendre Miller, Luke McCaffrey, and Devontae Walker late. We get the 3 rookie wide receivers to finish out the receiver build. Another piece to the 0 RB room as well. It's a fun team. I mean, I think the Rodgers element, you really need him to hold up alongside Caleb Williams. You need Caleb to have a good year because it's only a 2 QB build, and yet, we don't have him stacked. You could kind of criticize the quarterbacks to some degree. You were just talking through some of the logic behind it, though, as well. And particularly with the bet on Rodgers and being willing to stick to a 2 QB build, I'll note that, when you start with Garrett Wilson in the first round, you're kind of already making that bet. If Rodgers goes out, this team's not winning the BBM, right? Like you need Aaron Rodgers to play a full healthy season and have a meaningful year for Garrett Wilson to really be the key piece in the early rounds. That's the scenario you're living in. And so, him at pick 154 feels like low draft capital for your QB2 and a 2 QB build a little bit. And Sean, you were talking about some of the late QBs, and I was definitely open to those paths. We just didn't have the right pick set up. And maybe Fields would have been that pick where we took Kendre, as you noted, that probably in hindsight would have been a fun element to add some ceiling potential at the position, especially with these Ayuk rumors. I mean, Fields in the 16th round has got to be a really nice pick at this point, because it looks like even if Russell Wilson does start and people are really focused on that week 1 element, that Fields has done enough that he's going to be breathing down his neck. And as soon as Wilson starts to struggle, going to be potentially taking over and not looking back. So yeah, he would have been an intriguing one. There's some ways we could have done the QB3 thing, but the fact that we didn't, I'm not that worried about. I think of, in this particular build with the Wilson pick in round 1, I think of Rodgers as a more, stable pick than his 13.10 ADP suggests and his Achilles rehab suggests. I think you kind of have to assume that he's going to be healthy and productive, and that's what ties the build together, and that starts with the Garrett Wilson pick in round 1.
I think that we could have taken Fields instead of either McMillan or Miller. So there were 2 different options there, both in terms of the specific players that we did not have to have and the specific position we did not have to have. But I'm in complete agreement that I love the way it turned out. Ben, you and I know your listeners, viewers recognize that I'm an optimist, but this actually might be my favorite team purely from the perspective of executing the 0 RB portion of it. So again, this is a team where through 7, we have no running backs, and I love those first 7 picks. But then this is a Jaylen Warren, Chase Brown, Javonte Williams, Zach Charbonnet, Bucky Irving, Kendre Miller team. I mean, those are the perfect 6 guys. I just can't imagine a stronger 0 RB group than that. I really like all 6 players.
Yeah, this is a fun Zero RB room for sure. The Chase Brown, Javonte Williams double dip at the 9-10 turn. Those are probably my two favorite this year, just profile-wise and exposure-wise and all of those things. Kendre was in that group. And Bucky, those are the two guys that I have the most exposure to because they've been cheaper, right? And so they've been easier to get into every single build almost. Jalen Warren, obviously. Zach Charbonnet, obviously, in the range he goes is so fun to add to these things. So a really, really fun build, Shawn. Thank you so much for joining me. I know you have a lot to do today. Not going to do a super long stream or anything. Appreciate everybody hanging out and watching as well. I do want to throw a note here. When I was talking about the slow drafts, Zach Meyer made a great point here. Space out those slows. He said he's in about 10 and has 4 of the same drafters in each of them. When I go do my border run and enter a bunch of slows, I have all the same drafters. And so it's part of the reason that my exposures get extreme is like I'll get with the same people that all don't want to draft, Bucky Irving. And it's like, all right, well, I'm going to take Bucky Irving in all of these drafts behind ADP. I'm going to take him ahead of ADP as well before I even figure out that he's behind ADP. It is a great note that you can wind up in rooms where the same player continues to slide or the same type of structure is, you're kind of being pushed that direction. It's not the most fun element when you're going through your portfolio. You're like, okay, all my stuff is the same. But yeah, I appreciate all you guys. The people really enjoyed it. It sounds like. Shawn, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, this was great. I appreciate the invitation. You've had so much awesome stuff out. I love doing the ranking show with you. It's fun to work through some of the ramifications of those different pieces in real time as you're working through a draft. Hopefully this is the big winner here. Ben, I'm going to have a piece on a guy that I'm going to propose the possibility that he's the most undervalued running back since LaShawn McCoy in 2016. That'll be the next thing if I can keep my writing streak going.
I love it. That sounds like an absolute can't miss, must read article. Until then, this has been Stealing Bananas. See you guys later.